Tonto y retonto.
Dumb and Dumber. The meeting between Trump and Milei in Washington was supposed to bring some calm to Argentina's economy, which is on the verge of collapse, and also to boost Milei's candidacy in the upcoming midterm elections. However, Trump launched into his personal show in front of the cameras and, running his mouth, talking too much, triggered a disaster, a political and economic earthquake in Argentina and across the region. Dumb and Dumber. Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning. From Buenos Aires, Argentina, we begin broadcast number 278 of Demolishing Myths. On the other side of the screen, joining us from Madrid, Spain, across the continent, is Mr. Fernando Moragón. Fernando, how are things over there?
El señor Fernando Moragón. Fernando, ¿qué tal todo por ahí?
Well, on the continent, we're still moving at the usual pace, always on the edge of the cliff, just waiting to see when we'll finally throw ourselves off and crash. But come on, this has already become the norm, hasn't it? I mean, the collapse, right? It's like being on the Titanic with the famous orchestra. You're sinking, but you're still there living a little, enjoying it as if it were just a cruise. Something like that. But anyway, you were talking about Milei. But come on. Does anyone really think Milei can do anything that isn't completely stupid? I mean, everything he's done is stupid. I mean, because a fool can only do foolish things, by definition. Can anyone imagine a fool doing smart things? No, because he's a fool. That's it. So, well, whether the degree of stupidity is greater or lesser will depend on the circumstances. At least he didn't, as you'd say to children, poop. I don't know if I can say the word shit, but fine, I'll say poop, in front of Trump. Imagine Trump saying, something smells weird here. And being diplomatic saying, Milei, little Javier, you didn't shit yourself, did you? And I'm saying it, well, wait a moment. I don't know, they're terrified, having a panic attack.
I'm not so sure, Fernando. I'm not so sure that this time we didn't witness another accident in Milei's pants, but at least the camera wasn't showing that part of his body.
The good thing about cameras is that they don't capture smells. That's something to be grateful for.
Exactly. By the way, as always, many thanks to all the supporters for joining us. And remember to help us out with a thumbs up, comments, subscriptions, memberships, and if you'd like, through PayPal, of course. You can also follow us on our social media, YouTube, of course, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok.
Querido Fernando, ¿qué tal si comenzamos a presentar los últimos acontecimientos?
Dear Fernando, how about we start presenting the latest geopolitical events in chronological order? Before talking about everything related to the meeting between Milei and Trump, let's first look at what happened over the weekend in the Middle East, specifically in Egypt, with the signing of the peace agreement in which neither the representatives of the Israeli government nor those of Hamas took part. A peace agreement signed between the two sides without their direct presence, quite unusual. But this man did take part. Pay attention to the image, Fernando. Peace 2025, Paz 2025. All the leaders gathered around him, and he, as the master of ceremonies, in his element during a lightning visit to Egypt. And here are some of the things that were said.
Y aquí algunas de las cositas dichas. Atención.
Can we get the documents, please? This took 3,000.
Attention, the background music.
De fondo.
3,000 years, Fernando.
Look, let's see. Let's say, if you had said 4,000, we could have talked about the first Akkadian invasions against the Sumerians, which wiped them out. But fine, we can stick with the Babylonian Empire. Let's see. After conducting important archaeological and historical studies, I've just discovered that the famous Stele of Hammurabi, the first collection of laws we have more or less written down and all that, Must be from around 1700 or so. At the bottom it says, signed Hammurabi and signed Donald Trump on the stone.
Exactly. So, after a while, how will this be characterized? The train of ignominy, of submission, the line of submission. Pay attention to this, Fernando. One after another, the world's leaders greeting Trump in Sharm el-Sheikh, the place chosen for this event, for this occasion. There he is, raising his little finger, alone like a fool. Well, here's the signature. There's the president of Azerbaijan, Azerbaijan, Trump would call him. Both of them, this fool also raising his little finger. No, it's fine. It's fine. This is very good.
There. Hand fight, like little kids. No, I'm leaving. No, you're not. I've got you hooked. Yeah, you're not leaving, you bastard. This has to be replayed in slow motion later, because the tension there, emotional tension between Trump and Macron, you've got to see this.
Yes, agreed. Now, beyond that, Macron has become just another one in this line of servile jesters at the service of this man, calling them one by one. Photo. Truly disgraceful. The role of these leaders, like some kind of slavish entourage of Trump. There, Erdogan on the other side. Always with a poker face, Erdogan. Yes.
Look, I'm even going to introduce you to the translator, because I have no idea what you're saying. Basically,
beyond this nonsense, Fernando, what do you think are the prospects for sustaining this peace agreement? Low, medium, or high?
Medias o altas.
Let's see, not low, extremely low. I mean, this is pure circus, pure spectacle, the kind of thing Trump loves and used to do a lot when he had that business show, that entrepreneur contest or whatever it was. Well, today the poor man has to go there because, being a Trump supporter, they must have told him, hey, come over here. But this is grotesque, a circus of the worst kind, one of the worst Hollywood-style shows. Because let's not forget what you also pointed out. When there's a big gathering of several heads of state, here we have the idiot who's my president. Well, yes, the head of government. That is to say, well, when that happens, what usually happens is that as the leaders arrive at the meeting, they're received by the host of the moment. So if you're in Egypt, it would be President al-Sisi. If you were, I don't know, in France, it would be Macron. I mean, no, here, how absurd. I'm already imagining myself receiving them in Egypt. It's a crazy idea. But then it has to be said that since he got carried away, we know Trump tends to do that. In the Knesset, which is the Israeli parliament, and all that, with all those things, he made them wait 4 hours. You can see footage where they're all sitting there, Maloney and the others, all of them, waiting on some chairs. We had some coffee, some tea, and so on. I mean, something truly disgraceful from these bootlickers, because there's no other word for them. But it's understandable. I mean, this clearly shows and reveals the messianic servile nature of all these people. The extent to which this is servile, shameful, humiliating for all these leaders is shown by the fact that some of those who should be there simply aren't, because they said, man, this is too much for me. For example, bin Salman, who in practice is the one in charge in Saudi Arabia, said, well, I'm not going. I mean, it's enough that I applaud the peace plan without having to go. But, as I said, it's something as surreal as the signing itself. What we're seeing is delusional, something Kafkaesque, surreal. A man who says he's made a peace plan, Trump, signs a peace plan, which he signs himself, in the capacity of, well, who knows, it's not even clear in what capacity, along with 3 others, I think there were 3. That is, with the Turks, with Erdogan, with the one from Qatar, I think that was the other, and I can't remember who the other one was. They sign it there. In what capacity? In other words, in no capacity at all. Because neither of the two parties, the actual signatories to the agreement, the ones who should have signed and thereby endorsed that peace plan, were there or signed anything.
Moreover, this staging of Trump as a peace mediator, as a sponsor of a peace agreement, when until the very last day, the United States was shipping weapons so that Palestinian civilians could be bombed to pieces. He wasn't even standing in the right place. He had his back turned, the idiot. This idea of an intermediary, mediator, promoter of peace, the very cause and architect of genocide, with Netanyahu's authorship, of course, that's beyond doubt. But behind Netanyahu's little puppet figure, behind this marionette, stands the puppeteer. The United States, the military sector, the military-industrial complex, the big businessmen, the major American digital and financial oligarchs, also tied to Israel. And yet, despite all that, he wants to appear there as the architect of peace, claiming the Nobel Peace Prize. Truly sinister, and even to some extent tragicomic, because there's a touch of very dark humor in this situation.
Humor negro, muy negro, presenta esta situación.
No, look. If it weren't for the repercussions of this whole charade, this imposture, well, it would be... Well, it's ridiculous. I mean, really, I can't recall anything like the kind of shows Trump puts on. It would be ridiculous. But, well, as you pointed out, in the end, it's as if I told a madman who wants to kill a lot of people but doesn't have the means, don't worry, I'll give you the gun. Well, it's clear who's to blame. I mean, Mr. Madman, I'm simplifying a lot. The madman is Netanyahu, and the one who gives him the gun is Trump. Trump provides the weapons so you can bomb the Palestinians and wipe them out, leaving Gaza in ruins. And then he says, no, but I'm the man of peace. I'm going to mediate and all that. I'm going to make a peace plan because so many people are dying. It moves me that so many people are dying. We already know the speech he's used with Ukraine, too. Many Ukrainians are dying, many Russians are dying, it's terrible, I'm moved, and so on. A staggering level of cynicism and hypocrisy. I mean, well, the problem here, I think, is that Trump, and at first it's kind of funny, but then it gets boring, has wanted to take on, in his public appearances, this role of, let's say, the Godfather, meaning a mobster, but a low-grade one. He doesn't have Marlon Brando's class when playing the Godfather, no. This is a cheap, small-time Godfather, that's what it is, so of course, and what we constantly see him doing is showing off. That is, telling people, no, I'm the one in charge here and all that, I'm the boss, I do whatever I want. And like that, look, if you have to kiss my ass, then you do it, period. That's why I'm in charge. Those so-called displays of strength, of I'm the one in charge and I'm going to make you an offer you can't refuse. Well, it seems like a parody of The Godfather or something like that. Well, no, it's reality. It's not a show parodying the great movie The Godfather. Well, all three of them, which are great. No, this is what we're seeing. This isn't Michael Corleone or Marlon Brando. This is a parody, a grotesque version of them. This is the level of Western politics.
Here, dear Fernando, is the report, just an hour and a half after this. Breaking news. Latest updates. The Israeli armed forces are informing us of the following situation.
Earlier today, several suspects were identified crossing the yellow line.
This is what happened yesterday, and this is the next report. According to the Israeli armed forces, a few minutes ago, some suspects were found trying to cross the yellow line. Remember, the line to which the Israeli armed forces were supposed to withdraw, according to this peace agreement.
Crossed the yellow line, approached IDF troops in northern Gaza.
The suspects crossed the yellow line and approached the Israeli armed forces, which constitutes a violation of the ceasefire agreement.
del acuerdo al alto el fuego.
And that's why the Israeli armed forces opened fire on the suspects.
Esto se trató de una infiltración a las...
This was about an infiltration against the Israeli armed forces, and that's why Israel's attacks took place. Well, hours later, curiously, for some reason, the Israeli armed forces always carry out attacks against the civilian population. Always for some reason, but always them first, always breaking the previously established agreements.
Siempre rompiendo los acuerdos previamente acordados.
Aquí están calentando motores, como yo digo. Es decir,
They're getting ready to roll, as I like to say. We all know that these agreements, this truce, for better or worse, won't last long. It'll last as long as it suits Israel and the United States, depending basically on whether they attack Iran or not. That is until they finish returning the so-called hostages, mainly the bodies of the deceased hostages in this case. They've already protested about that too. They've said no because 4 have been released and so on, but we're still missing however many. And I don't know what Hamas might have replied, but honestly I would have said, don't worry, you have... Look, see Gaza, it's a pile of rubble. Well, they must be under there. Go and look for them. That is to say, of course, look for them there in the rubble heaps you yourselves have created. They'll be around there somewhere. What do you want me to say? It doesn't matter. I mean, you're going to make up excuses, that's obvious. And that's why you're already, let's say, setting the stage. No, it's just that 2 Palestinians passed by and, they got lost and crossed 20 meters over the demarcation line and so on. Well, there you go. No, it's that they haven't handed over the bodies. No, it's that something else happened. They'll make things up. And the moment they want to do something, they'll obviously blame Hamas for breaking the agreement, and that'll be it. This script has been written for a long time, so no one should be surprised. Besides, we already know how Israel respects agreements. The basic idea is, you do nothing, and I can bomb whenever I feel like it. That's the concept behind Israel's agreements. No one should think this is going anywhere. It's not going anywhere. Nowhere. This is zero. And everyone knows it. I mean, all the players know it. Another thing is that the nutcase Trump wants to bask in glory and puts on these ridiculous shows that, well, I don't know, maybe in the United States some people think they're great. To us, it's laughable. I mean, because it's comical, it's grotesque, but this isn't going anywhere. And they've already said it. Netanyahu has already said it. They're not going to stop the war. Netanyahu is not going to stop the war. There's a hypothesis, I don't know if it's true or not, that says that when he gave that speech in the Israeli parliament and at Anisek, well, in a Trump-like crude style, instead of giving a speech, let's say as one should in a parliament, even if it's the real parliament. Anyway, pardon him, pardon him, pardon him. Mr. President, pardon Netanyahu. Some say this is because he wants to get rid of Netanyahu. And the best way is to pardon him, which would mean he wouldn't have to appear in the multiple trials he's facing, and that would allow him to leave, call elections, and go without worrying that the next step would be prison. That is, from that point on, he'd go to prison. Some say that's the reason, but, well, I'm not sure.
Yes, but Netanyahu doesn't want to give up power in any way, with or without prison. That's Trump's move, a bit naive, because even without prison, Netanyahu doesn't want to give up power. But well, it's a reasonable hypothesis. Fernando, on our way to today's main topic, how about we present something precisely located, in some way, geographically in between the Middle East and South America?
Well, it's something that... No, it's just that now that I remembered, to make it even more humiliating for those present there in Egypt, they were all sitting in the back and so on, and he was there talking and everything, the usual, I don't know if it was a press conference or something like that, and he said something like, More or less, well, there are many good and wonderful friends here. I love these friends. They're fantastic and amazing. Well, let's see. Not all of them are really friends. There are two who aren't. He said it just like that, huh? There are two who aren't. I'm not going to say their names because that would look bad and all, but there are two who aren't my friends. And I'm not going to say it, don't worry. Well, maybe I'll say it. This was recorded, you know?
Yes, yes, indeed.
This is the level of those in the back. Because they bring people there to do whatever they want to become emperor. But those in the back, how can they humiliate themselves to that extent? I mean, a serious guy wouldn't have played along, but faced with that kind of thing, he would have stood up and left.
On the way to the meeting between Trump and Milei, here's something in between. Today's statements by Maria Corina Machado, with Trump's son, by the way, on television. Pay attention to the statements of the Nobel Peace Prize winner in conversation with Donald Trump Jr., as he's called, Donald Trump's son, on the right. Pay attention to Venezuela's future if this lady ever comes to power there.
We are going to privatize all our industry. Venezuela has huge resources: oil, gas, minerals, land, technology. And as you said before, we have a strategic location, ours from the United States. And American companies are in, super strategic position to invest. Venezuela is going to be the brightest opportunity for investment of American companies, of good people that are going to make a lot of money.
Clarito.
Bueno,
Todo
a ver,
privatizado, todo entregado a Estados Unidos, colonia abierta.
He forgot to say one thing. You can invest there, and the companies that come will sell them everything dirt cheap at clearance prices. Of course, with a commission, you have to bring me a little envelope for my pocket. Well, that goes without saying. We're not going to privatize like that for free. No. You have to put some money in your pocket and all that. Life's tough and so on. Well, when I say this, it's not like I know the opposition, in quotes, of everyone, but the Venezuelan opposition is especially pathetic and pitiful. They're just really bad. I have to tell you something. Once, here, I won't say any names or anything anyway. Later it came out, but I was in a meeting, and as we were leaving, there were Venezuelan opposition members. And while here in Spain, both major parties fully support the opposition, both the PSOE and the PP. In this case, it was the PP, supposedly more aligned with them, let's say, in theory, but really they're basically the same, PSOE and PP. And they were scolding them, calling them stupid. The PP people were saying, "Come on, how can you do this? You're useless, you don't know what you're doing, this isn't how it's done," and so on. They were scolding them right in front of me, calling them stupid. They say you don't even know how to be in opposition from abroad. You're useless. That's why I say it's the most useless opposition in the world. So if Trump thinks that with this opposition, he's going to stir up passion among the Venezuelan people, that Corina, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, is coming, and that this will somehow manage something, they're living, in the third galaxy. They're in the Andromeda prison. These people are incapable. And besides, as soon as they arrive, they'd start grabbing money like crazy, fighting among themselves. Give me that money, it's mine. Really, that's just something we can't achieve.
Efectivamente. Sí, para colmo, Fernando, entre todos los opositores.
To top it off, Fernando, among all the opposition figures, Maria Corina Machado is perhaps the worst of them all, the most traitorous, with repeated calls for a US military invasion of Venezuela. Not all opposition members share that view, because ultimately, Venezuelans' problems should be solved by Venezuelans, not by Americans. Well, some opposition members more or less understand this obvious fact. Not all, but certainly not Maria Corina Machado. She supported the 2002 coup, the 2002-2003 oil strike, the attempts against Chavez, the 2014 street riots, the attempts against Maduro, everything. Even now, the military presence, and once again, the call for direct US intervention. Nobel Peace Prize, my dear. Nobel War Prize. Yes, that's what that award should be called. Speaking of the Nobel Peace Prize, back then Trump, feeling slighted, talked about Maria Corina, though he couldn't even remember her name. Pay attention to this.
Actually got the Nobel Prize called.
The person who ultimately received the Nobel Peace Prize doesn't even remember the name. They called me today and said, "I'm accepting it in your honor, Donald, because you really deserve it." It was a very nice gesture on their part. Maybe I didn't say give it to me. I didn't say that. Although maybe she would have given it to me herself. Because I've been helping her a lot along the way. She needs a lot of help. And I've been helping her for a long time.
Basic disaster. So, and you could also say it was given out for 24, and I was
Everything is a mess over there.
all of the transactions that we did.
We must also remember that that award was given in 2024, and at that time, I was campaigning. All the peace agreements I achieved this year, 2025.
I'm happy because I saved millions of lives.
But there are those who say that, despite that, they should have given us the prize this year. But I don't care. I'm happy because I saved millions of lives.
This guy in Narnia. Honestly, I'm not sure about anything anymore. The thing is, he loves to mock people. And since he's the president of the United States and has a bunch of servile vassals, some of whom, like Maria Corina Machado, he can't even remember the name of, well, what for? I mean, there are categories of vassals. He's got vassals like the Europeans, who at least are prime ministers and such, and these others aren't even anything. So, why would he bother remembering their names? It's just not worth it. Well, I don't know if he's mocking them. There's probably some element of mockery, and then to what extent he actually believes it too. I mean, he believes he truly deserves the name of peace. It's really hard to tell with this man how much he actually believes what he says, and how much he's just laughing at everyone else. But here there's clearly a mocking tone, because when he says, "If I were Maria Corina Machado, I'd be ashamed." That is, when he says, "No, he offered it to me, he offered me the Nobel Peace Prize and all that," and I said, no, that's not necessary, he was about to give it to me, and so on. I don't know, you deserve it. He's making fun of you. I mean, it couldn't be clearer. He's mocking you. Well then, anyway, the Nobel Peace Prize, which really should be renamed the Nobel War Prize, because right off the top of your head, among the relatively recent ones, you go from Henry Kissinger to Obama, passing through Menachem Begin. The terrorist he was, as the Israeli Prime Minister said earlier, he was a terrorist and one of those who planted a bomb in that famous hotel, the King David, I think it was. I don't quite remember. That is to say, they killed a bunch of people. He was a terrorist, in the classic sense of the term. Well, then there are others out there. You go to Wikipedia, look up the list, and especially, well, the really old ones are less known, but the ones from the second half of the 20th century up to now, it's laughable. Opponents. One who was, opponent in quotes, you know, the one who carried out a soft coup in favor of the United States in Belarus. Another like Navalny, who was also one of those anti-Putin types. In other words, all cut from the same cloth, all pro-American, with more or less successful or failed attempts to stage coups in weak states. And you say, what is this? I mean, well, it's better not to get it. I mean, they give it to me. And you see I haven't done anything. But anyway, if they gave me the Nobel Peace Prize right now, I'd say, well, I'd accept it for the money, basically, because it's a lot. But otherwise, it's a disgrace. I mean, having the prize right now is a disgrace. Those people who don't have liquidity problems, well, if I didn't have liquidity problems, I'd say, no, not the prize. In fact, there's only one person who ever turned it down altogether, who was, I think, a Vietnamese.
I think I remember, but well, I mean, well, Sartre too, back in his day. But the one for literature, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes, but come on. It's an award that's completely discredited. Let's not forget how it's chosen. This isn't a committee of wise people, scientists, or experts like the ones for physics, chemistry, or medicine. Well, those might be more or less debatable, but still, more or less. No, this one is decided by 5 members of the Swedish parliament. I mean, it couldn't be more politicized.
Yes, Norwegian. In the case of the Nobel Peace Prize, it's decided by the Norwegian parliament, yes. In all the others, the Swedish one. But yes, in this case, the Norwegian.
So then, of course, you say, oh wait, I lost my train of thought here. The excitement of the moment made me mess up where the phone was placed. But yeah, that's the thing. They're members of parliament. I mean, when it comes to fairness, zero.
Efectivamente. ¿Qué tal, Fernando, si comenzamos con el tema
Exactly.
principal de esta transmisión?
So Fernando, how about we start with the main topic of this broadcast? From now on, the political and humorous analysis of what happened between Dumb and Dumber, Trump and Milley. To give a bit of context, Fernando, maybe we can go over what happened at the last or second to last meeting between Milley and Trump, their first one in person, during an event not of IPAC, but of CPAC, one of those American political and financial organizing committees that sponsor Trump's campaign and his administration.
Campaña de Trump y del gobierno de Trump, Milei invitado con su motosierra y ellos encontrados.
Milley, invited with his chainsaw, and they met backstage. That's why there's a lot of music and noise in the background. But specifically, we're going to witness the meeting between the two, and a completely unhinged Milley, maybe from excitement, but to such an extent, so drooling, so unpleasant, that even Trump reacts with a bit of disgust. Pay attention to these images. This was only posted on Instagram, so I'm going to show it directly from here. Just a second. Over here. One moment, here. There's the moment, I found it. Pay attention.
Ahí el momento lo encuentro. Atención. A Milley.
What does he say?
No, he can't. He wants to, but he's too emotional to do it.
Llorando.
Crying.
Quiere no puede 2 palabras de inglés, pero quiere un saludo, algo.
He wants a... He can't say 2 words in English, but he wants a greeting or something, and starts... And then the guy suddenly freezes, completely frozen, and even Trump himself, right? Looks a bit uncomfortable, and pulls away. The background music, obviously, because this is behind the stage. Well, that was their first meeting, about a year ago, right?
That he didn't take his medicine that day, that he didn't take it.
And of course, no, let's see, you can blame Trump for many things, but not for clinical insanity. This guy, well, poor. Not poor at all, because he's quite a piece of work, even though his mother doesn't like him either. But no, their relationship is really bad.
The mother rejects him.
Yes, both his mother and his father. And well, there's a sad story there, because apparently he was also mistreated by his parents. That, of course, doesn't please us at all, but that's also why he has such a close relationship with his sister. But the guy, a person... No, for the presidency of a country, no way. A guy completely out of his mind, unbalanced, a clinical patient, a clinical psychological patient, without this implying any stigmatization of anyone with a psychological or psychiatric condition. But he can't. he simply can't. Well, a little more, Fernando. Here are the images before the arrival. This is his arrival at the White House. And while we watch Milei entering, let me recall a bit of the context of this visit and what they specifically wanted to come here to do. The Argentine economy, Fernando, appears to be on the brink of the abyss, on the verge of collapse. In reality, the economic model of a cheap dollar as an anchor for inflation leads to the destruction of the economy. Basically, this generates recession, unemployment, and price freezes. Inflation has gone down, but at the cost of destroying the economy, and it still seems extremely high. Something like, kill the dog and the rabies dies. And this, moreover, creates a permanent need to maintain that cheap dollar, a constant need for dollars, and at the same time, capital flight. Every 3 months, a new threat of default, of economic collapse. They already helped him. First, a capital amnesty for Argentinians abroad, the first bailout, then a second IMF loan, all at the expense of the future, an additional $20 billion. And now, on the brink of collapse, Trump helped him with the statement, so far nothing more than that, of a bailout disguised as a currency swap, an exchange of currencies. This is a technical matter, a loan disguised as a trade exchange. So then, what's Trump's angle? What's the purpose of the trip for Trump? For Milei, basically, well, to somehow create a slightly less dramatic situation in the Argentine economy, to calm the economic waters ahead of the elections in a week, and at the same time have Trump endorse his candidacy so he can at least appear a bit closer to the opposition candidates. Because, according to all the polls, he's going to have a very poor showing, and that poor showing will directly lead to the fall of his government. Immediately after the elections, he's going to carry out a devaluation. I had predicted this before the elections, but well, the International Monetary Fund helped him at first, at the beginning of his term, and now Trump has helped him. Otherwise, he would have already carried out a devaluation, and therefore, a bank run, a rise in the dollar's price, an increase in inflation, a disaster for everyone. The situation was already terrible, but this rupture would create something even worse. This is the goal of, and the surprise for Milei and his team, always poorly prepared. They didn't just want a meeting, but as always, Trump wanted a televised meeting. A televised meeting with the cameras right there. And loudmouth Trump, couldn't help himself and started taking over the show and rambling. And this caused a disaster. We now present the footage over here.
Notice that, well, we'll see it now, we'll talk about it. Because even in the first images you could tell that Milei was doing terribly. In those images, look, he arrives and doesn't know what to do. He's so nervous that he does that little finger thing. Trump goes along with it like saying, okay, we'll do the finger, and stays like that. And in fact, he leaves. He goes inside still doing the little finger thing.
That is to say, exactly. Well, this theoretically now with subtitles, images, a little clearer. Well, there it is. Well, the subtitles just added. Now, yes, a little bit back there. There you can see them, thanks. Yes. Well, first that.
Primero, esa peluca a la derecha, esa melena, ese Milei, ahí va.
Wig to the right, that mane, that Milei there, drooling in front, like that. And here he basically recaps the story between the two of them since Milei's campaign, which he helped with, and presents him as a great economist with excellent ideas. In the campaign, basically, I remember some of his ideas, like the free market as the only form of interaction between people, and therefore, basically, he endorsed the sale of children and the sale of organs in the name of the free market. Did you hear that, Fernando?
En el nombre del libre mercado. ¿Escuchado eso, Fernando?
Sí, bueno,
Yeah, well,
Creo que el libre mercado.
I think the free market is the best. Then people could sell their organs and could also sell their children. Those are the fabulous ideas, the so-called ones, the referred ones.
no, pero esto por desgracia no solo lo hacen estos
no.
libertarianos y tal.
But unfortunately, they don't just do this. These libertarians and such have gone so far as to say things like, we should privatize the air. The air, I mean, this stuff that's just spread around. So, well, they calculate it, and each of us breathes a certain amount of air, and then you can make transactions with the air. Absurd things. I mean, it doesn't surprise me that they're into this kind of craziness, because, well, these people want to privatize everything.
Porque, bueno, esta gente que quiere privatizar todo, pues hasta cosas como...
Well, even things like that. Then this idea that Argentina is on the verge of a breakthrough, as he calls it, like a turning point. Yes, a turning point, but not a positive one, rather the collapse of the economy. By the way, throughout this talk, he's not only going to address issues related to Argentina, but also to the BRICS, China, Spain, very harsh ones too, and to Ukraine and the Tomahawks. So stay tuned, stay tuned.
Así que atentos, atentos.
Tremendous economic success, and I know that Scott Bessent is helping, and our great Scott is doing a job, and he feels very strongly about it. And Scott, do you want to say just a couple of words about that?
Scott, el ministro de Economía, ¿no? El secretario de...
The president is fighting 100 years of bad economic history and policy, and is...
Both presidents.
Both.
We're fighting bad. I thought he was talking about the U.S. president.
Are you hearing that, Fernando? The shamelessness with which he characterizes Trump's interventionism. Since elections are about to start in Argentina, and he represents the far right in the interests of the United States, now we're helping him. Not like Obama, who didn't help the right-wing governments of recent years. And when we don't help right-wing governments, then later, as an alternative for us, Venezuelan drug boats appear, and we have to destroy them. The confession of the imperial policy of the United States, gunboat policy, but without any pretense, just like that.
But what really amazes me, to use a word, is the shamelessness and the twisted logic. Well, I don't even know if I should call it logic, because it's not logical. I mean, since the conservatives weren't winning, during Obama's time we supposedly had to destroy boats in the Atlantic Ocean. Come on, explain the logic of how you go from that to destroying boats. It makes absolutely no sense. I hope he's just saying it to say something, that he doesn't actually believe it. Because if he does, we're really in a very serious situation, since these people are flailing around blindly without even knowing what they're doing. And that's what's serious.
Well, speaking of total disorientation, in 2 minutes, Trump is going to make one of his statements, and that's going to cause ripples in Argentina and across the region.
He's got a great cabinet, he's got a great team who we've worked with over the past weeks.
And the election is coming up very soon, and it's a very big election being watched by the world, because he's done an incredible job, but with that comes some pain. And they have some pain, and now they're coming out of it. I think the victory is very important. Your poll numbers I hear are pretty good, but I think they'll be better after this. And, you know, our approvals are somewhat subject to who wins the election.
Well, basically, if he does badly in the elections, we're not going to help him. That's the message. Meanwhile, the Argentine government is waiting for a $20 billion loan for a bailout before default and economic collapse. If he doesn't win the elections, we're not going to help him. Those were Trump's words, repeated several more times. Alarm. Immediately after these statements, in Argentina, the dollar price once again went up. The price of Argentine stocks hit the floor, went down. Total disaster. Scott Bessent, a bit sharper, is going to respond here by somehow downplaying this, but Trump is going to hammer the same point. If he doesn't win, if the others win, the communists, the socialists, the Peronists, then we're leaving.
In New York, Mondani, who I don't even think he's a Peronist, I think he's more the communist chauvinismo. So we stand with the president and what he stands for and the hope for the Argentinian people. And President Trump, just like you, he carries the young people. So it's hope for the future. The Argentines have made the decision to shake off 100 years of bad policy. They went from one of the richest countries in the world to a ton of debt. And I think that with the bridge the U.S. is giving them and the strong policies, that Argentina can be great again.
Bueno, esto de país rico a un país...
Well, this whole thing of going from a rich country to an indebted one is basically because of the neoliberal policies pushed by the United States. And because of the debt, by the way, with the IMF with them, since it's the mechanism of political control the United States uses over countries around the world. And above all, over Argentina. Well, now, a few words from Milei, fumbling, stammering.
Tartamudeando.
Very well. Please, please. Thank you very much for this reception. I feel very honored, especially at this moment when, thanks to your great leadership, President Trump, peace has been achieved in the Middle East.
Not even attention, Trump.
This great achievement has not only been about making peace in the Middle East, but also about securing the return of the 20 hostages alive. In addition, I want to offer my congratulations for that work and for understanding the threat that 21st century socialism represents around the world, especially in Latin America. I want to highlight the work of Marco Rubio and deeply thank Secretary Basant for the tremendous effort he has made to help overcome this liquidity problem that Argentina was facing as a consequence.
Problema de iliquidez.
Liquidity problem. Liquidity, yes, a liquidity problem. This guy has liquidity problems in his head. The economy is destroyed, on the verge of default, representing a liquidity problem. All of us with liquidity problems.
Todos nosotros con problemas de liquidez.
Pero fíjate cómo habla Milei, es decir,
But look at how Milei talks. I mean, thank you very much for, mechanically, like a robot. I want to say thank you very much, President Trump, for what you've done to get rid of the communists, the socialists. Thank you very much for the MAGA. It's something that must be being said right now. I mean, as we say here.
There on the right, the first face to the right of Morea, and looking at him with a desperate expression, is the Minister of Economy, Caputo. He is responsible both for the current $20 billion debt and for the previous $50 billion won under Macri. Of the $55 billion allocated, only $45 or $44 billion were ultimately delivered.
A guy who would say so.
In reality, a guy with no economic training, other than as a stockbroker in the United States. He and his buddies from the big American investment funds. Well, he's the Minister of Economy in both Macri's and Milei's governments, responsible for 45,000 plus 25,000, $65 billion in direct debt with the International Monetary Fund. Then, of course, you have to add all the debt taken on from private investors, all of it used for capital flight among his friends. According to many people, this aid from Trump, this so-called rescue, in quotes, through a currency swap, serves the purpose of allowing US investment funds, friends of Caputo, who initially invested money in Argentina and are now desperate to abandon ship before it sinks, to get those dollars so they can make one last escape with their capital and leave before the total collapse. The friends of that man is a traitor to the country. Well, Milei too, but Milei is completely insane. After the elections, Milei should end up in a psychiatric hospital, and that other man should end up in jail for treason. That's the Minister of Economy, Caputo. Just a bit more of these clowns.
The political attacks we have suffered from our opponents, who do not want Argentina to once again embrace the idea of freedom, and who want to return to outdated, failed ideas that are in essence nothing more than paths leading to socialism. So first of all, thank you very much for receiving me. Thank you very much for what you are doing for the free world. And many thanks to Secretary Vélez for the tool he has implemented, which allows us to have a roadmap to move forward calmly and do what Argentinians need. I believe it will be a good case to show that the idea of freedom works and produces results. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Do we have a interpreter that wants to...
Well, this is Milei's statement.
Does everyone understand? Because I think he made a very important...
Y ahora, algunas cosas de...
And now, some things from Narco Rubio and Trump about China, Spain, and the BRICS.
We have somebody set up for that?
Acá Trump simplemente quería el resumen de las cosas...
Here, Trump simply wanted a summary, in English, of the things Milei said for the audience over there. But well, they couldn't do it, so they start over very quickly. And I think this is going to lead to something that will be irreconcilable, of course. What has happened in the last few days, people can't believe it. I've never seen anything like it. I've never seen that kind of love, that spirit. And I've done many things. I've done a lot of business, a lot of political deals, where countries come together, or whatever. But I've never seen anything like this, that level of love. And I think it has to do with the mysticism of the Middle East.
And it has to do with the mystique of the Middle East, I think, because if I did other countries, I did 7 other settlements of wars, complete settlements.
Because if I did it in other countries, I did. I handled 7 other matters of wars, full conflicts, and it was very well received. But this is something I've never seen. The media covered it very well. Even the fake news, of which we had plenty, actually covered it quite well. For a change. And we appreciate that. We have to get back to that. It's so important. But I just want to say it's a pleasure to be with you. We're going to eat and take a couple of questions from the press, and I'm sure they'll be extremely non-hostile and kind.
Like JD went through a very friendly interview with George Stephanopoulos, who was nice enough to pay.
Since JD went through a very friendly interview with George Stephanopoulos, it was enough to pay me $16 million. The last time we came, he had to pay me $16 million. Which was good. It was valuable to have someone say that if you get $16 million, that's good. But JD had a very damn person interviewing him, and we can't let that happen. It's inappropriate to cut off a very respectful Vice President of the United States in the middle of a sentence. I think it's a way to win an argument. That was the only way to win the argument. It was quite inappropriate, I'll tell you that. The moment of the little gifts.
El momento de los regalitos.
Milei doesn't know a word of English, by the way, does he? That's why. And also, well, he doesn't know Spanish either.
No puede hacer caso en ningún idioma.
He can't pay attention. In no language, thank you.
Such a beautiful statement. Thank you very much.
Bueno, ahora las preguntas y acá cada vez peor, mayor la metida.
Well, now for the questions. And here it just keeps getting worse. An even bigger blunder.
It's really meant to help a good financial philosophy.
The question from an American reporter. To what extent is this America first? Of course, because giving money to his allies around the world, how does that help Trump's electoral base? Not at all. Quite the opposite. And here's Trump's response.
Where Argentina can, after 20 years of disaster, because it was very successful at one point, and it can be again, like Venezuela. Venezuela was very, very successful, and now it's a dictatorship. When we can help our neighbors, we're making tremendous progress in...
If it weren't for him, Argentina would be lost to us. The geopolitical perspective of the United States, with Trump at the helm, regarding the American continent, is crystal clear.
A la cabeza respecto al continente americano.
Y el chantaje que le está haciendo...
And the blackmail he's using against the Argentinians. He's saying, look, long live democracy, but if you want money, you have to vote for Milei. Because if you don't, I won't give you any money. So look, better not vote, or vote for Milei, or do whatever you want, but if you want money, this guy has to stay.
Beware of Russian interventionism in the elections, Fernando Moragón.
Have you seen any drones around Buenos Aires these days?
No, no, pero los drones
No.
de Trump también recorren el continente, evidentemente.
No, but Trump's drones also roam the continent, obviously. Open colonialism. First, they obviously sponsor the crises, they create them, naturally driving crises and debt. And then as a rescue. Oh, you want a rescue? Well, in exchange, only if you vote for Milei. If not, goodbye. Plain and simple political extortion.
Adiós. Extorsión política lisa y llana.
He started it, I'll tell you. Barack Hussein Obama started it. Could you give a couple of words on South America? You were telling me so well yesterday how well we're doing. Go
Well,
ahead.
first of all, we have now 8 or 9, 10 countries, Argentina being foremost among them, that have aligned with the United States on issue after issue in international community events all over the world. There, in fact, these great allies like Argentina, but I can go into others, Costa Rica, I don't want to leave anybody out, El Salvador, but I think one of the more promising developments is later this month, there'll be an election in Bolivia. After 25, 30 years of anti-American hostile government, both of the candidates running in that election, in the runoff election, want strong and better relations with the United States and another transformative opportunity there. But so I think this is important. This is our hemisphere. It's where we live. And having strong neighbors such as this.
And great progress has been made, really.
And we'll make more.
Over the last 9 months. Really over the last 9 months. Yeah, please.
The president from Argentina, Buenos Aires. Do you imagine soon a free trade agreement with Argentina? Could it be possible soon?
Yeah, it will be. Well, we're going to discuss some of it today. But no, we want to help Argentina. And we want to always help ourselves. But we want to help Argentina. And one of the ways we can do it, they have great product. And we used to do a lot of trade. And then if you look at what the Democrats, well, they didn't know. They didn't know. Honestly, they didn't know what they were doing. But a lot of that trade disappeared. And they have great product. So we will.
Well, here's the first question about China.
Yeah, sure. I mean,
Bueno, acá la primera pregunta sobre China.
Hay un momento que dice,
There's a moment when he says, no, look,
no, a ver, no.
we don't want to help Argentina. We want to help ourselves.
Ayudarnos a nosotros mismos.
Claro, con un acuerdo de libre comercio como el rechazado en su momento.
Of course, with a free trade agreement like the one once rejected by Chavez, Nestor Kirchner, and Lula when they wanted the FTA a free trade area, it would basically mean total submission to the United States. Here's the first question about China, regarding China's decision to halt soybean purchases, which are extremely important for American farmers. The United States is the top soybean exporter, but the second and third are Brazil and Argentina. And in response to the tariffs imposed by Trump in this latest round, the Chinese decided to stop buying soybeans. In addition, another point, with this supposed fiscal aid to Argentina, the government immediately decided to lower taxes on soybean exporters, which led to a strong outflow of cheap soybeans from Argentina instead of US soybeans. That also harmed American farmers. That's why this question arises about China, soybeans, and the United States.
Soja y Estados Unidos. Sí, Fernando.
Pero fíjate que antes, cuando interviene Marco Rubio, lo dice.
Yes, Fernando.
Bueno, a ver, tenemos unos cuantos.
But notice that earlier, when Marco Rubio speaks, he says, well, let's see, we've got a few who are on our side and so on, like those from El Salvador. I don't know what, I don't know how many. And besides, now there are elections in Bolivia, and if our people win, meaning clearly saying, we've already got these, and these by the, well, let's see if we can finish the job now. In other words, openly acknowledging which countries are already vassals and which might become so in the near or not so near future, depending on whether our people win. I mean, it couldn't be more blatant.
Impossible. A little more about China now.
that's natural. It's China, and it's natural, but it's not gonna mean anything in the end.
From Argentina, should Argentina end the China swap and close the space base in Neuquén?
I don't think you should be doing business much. You can do some trade, but you certainly shouldn't be doing beyond that. Certainly shouldn't be doing anything having to do with the military with China.
The issue with the swaps refers to an already existing currency exchange, because at another time, China also helped Argentina with a loan received by Cristina's government, but later renewed several times, even by Milei. Without that Chinese money, during Milei's administration, the Argentine economy would have already collapsed. And among the initial conditions of this US loan, abandoning the other loan was presented as an indispensable requirement. But that would cause the immediate collapse of the economy. So now they're going to respond to this, and on that basis, this supposedly space-related Chinese base in Neuquén, a research base.
And tiny, so tiny.
have been created in Argentina.
Did you hear that? Let me correct myself. No, I wasn't referring to the swap, that they should abandon the swap, but rather I was referring to military bases, ports, and facilities.
Very clear. But come on, they don't really hide it much either. I mean, since Trump arrived, one of the things his administration has been very clear about is expelling the Chinese from Latin America, by any means, from the very beginning. He sets up the following scheme. On one hand, I strengthen my country by buying Greenland and annexing Canada, which gives us a larger nation with more resources. A fundamental reason, because they're not exactly overflowing with resources, including land, and the second part is I focus on expelling the Chinese, starting with Panama, remember with the canal issue and all that, and then Argentina, and so on, everywhere. That is to say, because in the end, if the North American empire is no longer able to keep controlling the world, they have to hold on to what they can control, from their point of view, which is Latin America. Because they have an ocean on one side and another on the other, the Atlantic and the Pacific. Then they consider Eurasia and Africa lost, but not this. Besides, the amount of resources here is crucial. The lithium triangle between Argentina, Chile, and Bolivia, and many other things, like Venezuela's oil. So it's no coincidence that they're now putting on the show they're putting on, with all the deployment and bombing boats left and right. In the end, they need Venezuela's oil. They need the lithium from Argentina, Chile, and Bolivia. They need the resources, which are key. And that's why they have to take everything and push the Chinese out. Because the Chinese offer, let's say, deals to Latin American countries that are more advantageous than what these others can offer. So since they can't compete with the Chinese, what's their idea of a free market? Kicking them out by force, with gunfire, if necessary. In other words, this is the free market according to my law, Trump and company. When it benefits me, we apply it. When it doesn't, we use brute force and to hell with it. That's how it is.
Así mismo, efectivamente, un poquito más.
That's right, exactly. A little more.
It's going to be great, and we will benefit also, but it's not that big a benefit because it's not that big a country, but it's a very important country.
Well, there he's overwhelmed by the question about the dollarization of the Argentine economy and can't answer anymore. But of course, that's why he calls Scott Bessant to help him. But with this thing about
llama a Scott Bessant para que lo ayude, pero con
esto se lo dejo a otro.
Pero sí queremos,
But yes, we want the dollar as the currency for exchange instead of the yuan. Of course, that's going backward, right?
Kamala, you wouldn't have the dollar as your currency anymore. You wouldn't have a world domination by the dollar if I didn't win this election. And now the domination, like BRICS. I told anybody wants to be in BRICS, that's fine, but we're going to put tariffs on your nation. Everybody dropped out. They're all dropping out of BRICS. BRICS was an attack on the dollar. And I said, you want to play that game, I'm going to put tariffs on all of your product coming into the U.S. They said, like I said, we're dropping out of BRICS. And BRICS is like, they don't even talk about it anymore. Scott, do you want to answer that?
Lo de ladrillos por los BRICS, seguramente.
The thing about BRICS and the BRICS was probably understood that way, because BRICS in English literally means ladrillos. That's why they said they came out of the BRICS, not they came out of the BRICS. We're showing these few seconds again because of the BRICS thing, which is super important from now on.
And now the domination like BRICS. I told anybody wants to
como el BRICS. Le dije a cualquiera.
Like the BRICS. I said anyone who wants to live within the BRICS, that's fine. Everyone is leaving the BRICS. BRICS was an attack. They're abandoning the BRICS.
We're very happy with the current currency arrangement.
Scott Bessant replies quickly. No. It's better if Argentina doesn't dollarize, because that would bring a lot of consequences for the United States as well. And for Argentina, it would mean the absolute end of monetary sovereignty. Fernando, the confrontation with the BRICS over the American continent is now open. Crystal clear.
Of course. He's been saying this from the beginning, and we can already see that diplomacy is definitely not Trump's strong suit. And well, aside from the fact that, I understand that politicians, when they reach this level, have to maintain deceitful, false speeches. They all do it. But what's worrying is that they're outright denying reality, and that Trump is telling me exactly the opposite. No, he's already talked to the BRICS and all that, and supposedly they're all leaving. Things are getting worse every day. No, it's the other way around. That is, they're getting stronger. That's why you're afraid of the BRICS, not because they're leaving, but because they're getting stronger. And then, well, what he confessed since the electoral campaign, the dollar must be defended at all costs. And at all costs means at all costs, that is, with cannon fire if necessary. Plain and simple. Well, let there be no doubt that the confrontation between the BRICS and the United States is deadly, in the sense that it's one or the other. Because if the BRICS succeed, the United States will sink. And if the United States manages to destroy the BRICS, then it would prolong its imperial dominance for a while. But that the BRICS are an alternative to the American model, to the American economy, and to a dollarized world where the dollar is used to dominate the rest of the countries, that must be made clear. They are an alternative, and moreover they move faster than it seems, considering that they are a group of very diverse and varied people. That is, reaching a consensus among the economies of countries that even have geopolitical tensions such as India and China is very complicated. And with the expansions that have taken place, the BRICS Plus and so on, it's a lot of people. What does the economy or the interests of Saudi Arabia have to do with those of Russia? Well, in some things yes, in others no. It depends. So that's something to keep in mind. And despite that, it's becoming increasingly clear that it's going to be a system, even if we don't yet know what its structure will be, but one that will be led by China, and that in some way will create a complete and absolute alternative to the decaying Bretton Woods world. That is, to the world of the major institutions dominated by the United States, the IMF, the World Bank, even the United Nations. Careful, they're not going to say it. And now we see the Chinese and the Russians arriving there and saying, no, we have to keep the United Nations and all that because it's a great place. Look, they do it because precisely what the Americans want is to belittle and do whatever they please with the United Nations because they don't respect what the UN stands for in terms of international law. Instead, they have their own rules-based international order, meaning an international order based on whatever they feel like. So to stand up to the Americans, the Chinese and Russians are defending the United Nations, the UN Charter, and international law, which is what the Americans don't respect. But they know perfectly well, even if they don't say it, that this is unreformable, that there's no way. And therefore they will have to build something parallel, that at some point, we don't know when, will no longer be called that. That is, it will be something else, initially some kind of agreement and so on. But ultimately what it will do is create a sort of parallel United Nations, excluding those of the rules-based international order, excluding the West, the collective West, which will refuse to accept it, because it will not accept an equal deal, unless it is the one in control, unless the United States is the hegemon, and its vassals are the ones benefiting from the hegemon's scraps. They will not accept it. And that rupture of the world order, that international rupture, is already taking shape. In other words, it's not something we can say, oh, in 100 years. No, it's already taking shape. And that's why my entire group is concerned about the BRICS. Because they know it's an alternative that goes beyond mere cooperation between states. It's an alternative model that will start generating parallel institutions.
un poquito más sobre BRICS.
A little more about the BRICS, about Spain and about Ukraine, Fernando, about Trump, about China, a conference by Trump that was quite something, well, like all of his. Speaking without a filter, a bit here, a bit there.
To make him look bad. I believe he's going to win out. China?
Well, that's kind of a silly question.
Even exceeding $18 trillion going to be invested in the United States. That's more money than ever invested in any country before. Even countries with much bigger populations like India or like China. Nobody's ever had $18 trillion invested in the country. We have, and that's because of November 5th election, because I won. Oh, if she won, you'd be negative. You'd have people getting out of the country. This country would have been in a major depression. If she won, we would have been 1929. They'd like to see that anyway. That's why they keep the government laws. They have a shutdown based on nonsense. They want to give away 1.5, think of it, they want to give away $1.5 trillion to people that come into the country illegally. And as you know, the borders now are closed. But when they hear that they get the greatest health care package in the world and they have no money, but they're living okay in another country, they head up and they start forming caravans and they try and come into our country. But the big problem is they want to give health care to people that should not get health care. They want to give health care to illegal immigrants by the millions. Look at Gavin Newsom, what he's done. He's ruined California. He gives health care to anybody. And I guess they do it for votes. I actually think it's bad politics, but I guess they do it for votes. So I'm with this man because his philosophy is correct. And he may win and he may not win, but I think he's going to win. And if he wins, we're staying with him. And if he doesn't win, we're gone.
How can the Argentina help to the peace process to the Middle East?
Bueno, esto es una pregunta medio tontona. Ahora lo de...
Now about Spain, around here a little further ahead. Yes, Fernando.
No, pero fíjate, es decir,
No. But look, what the guy is saying, he starts off talking about China, the Chinese and all that. And he tries to give this is very typical of people who are in a position of weakness and who know they're in a position of weakness and try to give an absolutely false impression, saying, no, the Chinese, Xi Jinping, who got angry and all that, whatever. But come on, we've invested who knows how much and all that, and we've basically got them by the balls and so on. Whatever. No, it's the complete opposite. Right now, China is creating a disaster in the United States. Not just because of the soybean issue, where they said, oh, you weren't selling soybeans. You were China's main soybean supplier. But there's no problem. Because it turns out the Brazilians also have soybeans, and we buy them from the Brazilians. That's what they're doing now. But then these people come along and say, rare earths. You're going to have problems with rare earths. In the United States, they're in a panic. In a panic because it's no longer just about one industrial sector. There's nothing, absolutely nothing in modern technologies. I mean, the wheel and all that. You can still make it without rare earths. But the wheel, right? And carts with wheels too, sure. But ones that don't have rare earths. And we're talking, as we saw the other day, from the military sector to cell phones, everything, computers, those famous database fields and so on, where all the servers are. There's nothing in current technology that doesn't require rare earths. So they're desperate because they have no alternative to China. There is no alternative to China, not for the United States, not for Europe, not for anyone. The second largest producer of rare earths in the world is Vietnam. The third, I can't remember if it's Malaysia, but all of them are far behind. They only have one ally with some rare earths, which is Australia. The rest don't have any. And with what Australia has, it's not even enough to get started.
Y con los de Australia no tienen ni para empezar. De ahí que estén ahora mismo muertos de pánico.
That's why they're currently terrified in the United States, because they can't even make a decent airplane without rare earths, since those are key components in microelectronics, in magnets, in everything. In other words, well, the United States has realized this and doesn't know how to get out of the mess. Well, actually, it does know how to get out of the mess. By backing down, which is what they're doing and what they're going to do. No, well, let's talk and so on. And, okay, you lift the sanctions on rare earths, and I'll lift these. But since Trump and U.S. interests have to defend the constant attack on China's technological progress through sanctions, as we already know, the so-called national security interest always leads us to take down Huawei, to take down 5G, to take down everything, to take down microchips, to take down semiconductors. What the United States just did in Europe, well, in the end, it's the United States, is outrageous. They went to the Netherlands, and a company, I can't remember the name, which is a Chinese company, let's say its branch here in Europe, meaning the Chinese version of that company, was expropriated from the Chinese in the Netherlands. Just like that, blatantly. I mean, look, I don't know, I'm terrified. Because if the Chinese ever really get angry one day, we'll all end up back in the Paleolithic. That's the truth. So, well, on one hand, they have a policy where they have to go after the Chinese. And from a technological standpoint, they're messing things up because they don't have, how would Trump put it, the famous winning card. Well, that winning card belongs to Xi Jinping, not to you. And of course, the Chinese are responding with relative moderation. But the day they say that's as far as we go, the United States and Europe will go straight back to the prehistoric era. What we're doing right now, something so common, through YouTube, making connections on Zoom or whatever, talking about work and so on, would be over. Finito. Nothing works without rare earths. The screens of, I don't remember how many, but more than a dozen rare earths are used, for example, in cell phone screens, in touch screens. In other words, there's nothing. Forget it. So they're on the defensive, trying to sell us a story that's a lie. No, it's that we did this, the Chinese got upset and all that, but we've already handled it and they're going to back down. No, that's a lie.
About Spain, Fernando, about Spain.
Let's see if they kick us out of NATO, please.
Well, that's the idea of our comrade Trump.
Behind you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Last week you said that NATO should consider expelling Spain. What? You said that NATO should consider expelling Spain. Would you support that?
Here. Pretty clear question. Yes, with a bit of an accent, but he was completely lost.
And they know, look, they're sort of in the semi-middle of it, so they're going to get protected automatically. Even if you don't want to protect them, you're protecting them because of the way they're located. And I think what Spain did is a very bad thing for NATO. I think it's very unfair to NATO.
So how's it going, Fernando? You over there in Madrid, protected thanks to the United States. You're aware of that, right? Because without their protection, you'd be in danger.
Sí, yo cada día que me levanto digo,
Every day when I wake up, I say, I can get up calmly because I'm protected. I feel protected by NATO forces, and specifically by the Americans, who have done nothing but protect us since they set up their bases in Spain during Franco's time, as everyone knows. Now this, protected from whom? That would be the question. From Morocco? Well, they don't protect us from Morocco, I can tell you that. And from the rest? Protect us from Russia? Russia doesn't want to do anything against us. So what does that really mean? I mean, when they say no, NATO is to protect Europe. Europe from whom? Because the Russians, any halfway serious analysis knows they can't do much more than what they're already doing in Ukraine, or just a bit more. And the idea of invading Europe is sheer madness, a sales pitch nobody believes. So who exactly are we defending ourselves from? The problem NATO has is that since it doesn't have anyone to defend against, and hasn't since the moment the Soviet Union disappeared, it expanded, spread across Europe, and turned into a global organization, not the kind it was created to be. One meant for a hypothetical confrontation with the Soviet Union in the European theater. That's why NATO is called the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, not the whole world organization.
del Atlántico Norte. Es decir,
I mean, no, from the North Atlantic, one side and the other, and that's it. Well, then they spread out like the world police, got involved in Afghanistan, in a bunch of places, and all of them ended in complete failure. So from there, you say, but defend us from whom? Who are they supposed to defend us from? Because there's no one right now who wants to mess with NATO, with Europe, and actually has the capacity to do it. Because of course, if, I don't know, some tiny country out there says, I don't know, that joke we made a couple of shows ago, something like that, about the war between Albania and, well, Albania was in it too. The war between Albania and, who was it? Albania and Cambodia. Azerbaijan. Wasn't there one about Albania and Cambodia?
No, Azerbaijan and Albania. Azerbaijan and Albania. And then Armenia with Cambodia.
Cambodia. These are two countries that, as everyone knows, are next to each other. They share a border. I mean, well, a war between Cambodia and Armenia would be impossible, because neither of them has the capacity to attack the other. They're thousands of kilometers apart. That kind of thing. So of course they have to justify the unjustifiable, a NATO that's useless, that they wanted to turn into the world's police, and that has only proven its lack of functionality. As a military organization, it's a failure, because they get defeated. I mean, a military organization, look, a hospital exists to heal patients. If you heal many patients, you're a good hospital. If you kill a bunch, you're a terrible hospital and no one will want to go there. Well, it's the same thing here. It's a military organization that's supposed to deter or wage war. Let's not fool ourselves. So if you wage wars and lose them, then you're a terrible organization. Dissolve it. It's useless. It's all the same. I mean, come on, this... So, well, they have to tell us these stories. And about Spain, well, hopefully, look, there's one thing in Spain that's clear. Beyond the fact that, indeed, Pedro Sanchez is aligned with the Democrats and the globalists and all that, but we're very interested in having prime ministers, heads of government, as we call them here, like Pedro Sanchez. I mean, it doesn't matter whether they're socialists or from the PP. That's the least of it. They're servile vassals of the United States, as both the PSOE and the PP have shown for decades, not just now. So, well, in the end, this 5% thing, as you know, is a long-term matter. That is, if I remember correctly, all NATO countries have to meet the 5% target by 2035, if I'm not mistaken. That's the agreement they reached. Obviously, that has to progress gradually. In 2035, unless Donald Trump becomes a dictator, and by then he'd be quite old, he'd be 89, well, Donald Trump won't care one bit about what happens with NATO, because most likely he'll be dead. So all of this is kind of, well, it's a lot of fluff about not having managed to get NATO to reach 5%. Well, if this isn't going to be seen, I mean, indeed, there are countries that are increasing, and that had already increased, even some above 5%, like the Baltics and so on. But when these countries really face the Russians, if in the end, as everything indicates, we're going to get into this mess, we Europeans are going to get into this mess, well, it's going to be, it doesn't matter whether we have 5%, 14, 19%. If all this ultimately is being done to be able to steal, in Europe, I mean, to be able to steal from the Americans through Europeans buying their weapons from the North American military-industrial complex, and so that von der Leyen and company can cash in big time, that is, steal massively from those budgets that are going to be spent, as we're seeing in the case of Ukraine, on armaments. I mean, it's coming out everywhere, that Boris Johnson got £1 million, that someone gave him one for the Ukraine thing, and so on. £1 billion, not bad for a start. I mean, for these people, ultimately, they're thieves. I mean, we have to keep in mind that what these people want is to cash in. Beyond other things that they're called Russophobes, which they are, but what they want is to cash in. What they want is to steal. And that's it.
Y ya está.
A propósito, Fernando, de Rusia y de...
By the way, Fernando, speaking of Russia and the issue of Tomahawk missiles, incidentally, there are many rumors that in the meeting planned for this Friday between Zelensky and Trump in Washington, Trump will finally approve the delivery of Tomahawk missiles. On that note, the next question over here.
The biggest is that in terms of death, incredible. I think India, Pakistan had great potential. We did a great job of that one, but he's got to really settle this war. And you know they have long lines waiting for gasoline in Russia right now, right? They have long lines. Who thought that was going to happen? And all of a sudden his economy is going to collapse. And I'd like to see him do well. I mean, I had a very good relationship with Vladimir Putin, but he just doesn't want to end that war. And I think it's making him look very bad. He could end it. He could end it quickly. And I have to tell you, I give credit because who would think that Ukraine could have fought Russia for 4 years to essentially a standstill? Now, there has been some early, before they knew what the hell was happening, because it happened quick. Biden.
The question is once again mistranslated. Is he going to give Tomahawks to Ukraine? Is he going to give Tomahawks?
Tomahawk is a... Do you need any Tomahawks in Argentina?
Do they need Tomahawks in Argentina? That's the joke, right, about Tomahawks.
Bueno, ahí la pregunta, Milei, ¿quiere Tomahawks para la oposición en broma?
Well, here's the question, Milei. Does he want Tomahawks for the opposition? Just kidding. Still, quite an inappropriate question in general, as a statement about the opposition. But anyway, neither yes nor no, more of a maybe in the answer. Fernando, your perspective on the Tomahawks. On this topic, we'll go into much more depth on Friday, but what's your view so far?
Bueno, yo tengo clarísimo. Quiero decir algo. Me puedo equivocar, pero tengo clarísimo. Es decir,
well, I'm absolutely sure about this. Let me say something. I could be wrong, but I'm absolutely sure. We're still seeing what Trump has been doing since he became president. And here he's done the same thing again. Like Putin, I get along great with him, he's a nice guy and all that, but lately he's disappointed me because he did this and that. But then yes. No, because a lot of people are dying, many Russians, many Ukrainians. This is terrible, I'm shocked, and so on. Empty talk, meaningless words. Is he going to give the Tomahawks to the Ukrainians? No. It's more of the same. Keep stalling and let time pass, which works in favor of Russia and Trump for different reasons. Because what Trump wants is for the Russians to take the problem off his hands. And they basically get rid of the problem in the middle by winning the war. That is, what is it that the Russians seem to have already understood they need to do? Win the war. And that's why they're currently destroying Ukraine's energy systems. The citizens themselves are already acknowledging that 50% of the electricity that comes from hydraulic systems, that is from companies and such, is no longer available. At the same time, they admit they're also having huge problems with geothermal plants, etc., which have also been destroyed. In other words, they're facing tremendous problems, not only with electricity, but also with gas and oil, because gas and oil storage facilities, refineries, and so on are being attacked. That is to say, and they're already saying it publicly, we're going to have a very hard winter, get ready, we've got nothing. But the problem isn't that they're going to be cold. Well, the cold, bad as it is, you can manage somehow anyway. No, the thing is, they're running out of water. This is important, because if you lose electricity, you lose light. Well, you just go to bed earlier. I mean, fine, you go back to the Paleolithic, but if you run out of water, then you've got a real problem. It's not that you go back to the Paleolithic. It's that you have to go somewhere else. You have to migrate. And that's what's happening, because water reaches buildings everywhere. No, let's look. Water is in the ground, in tanks, and so on. And it has to be pumped up to higher places with electric pumps. That is to say, in most cases, they end up without drinking water. And without drinking water, you can't live. This is going to cause tremendous chaos. And surely we'll have to see, because in chaotic situations, all kinds of things happen. A migratory process, a second great wave of migration toward Europe. If you don't have water, you leave. That is, you go where there is water. This is obvious. But as I said, when it comes to the Tomahawks, that has to be completely ruled out. But not because of any trauma, no. To begin with, Tomahawks have 2, and I say 2.5 launch systems, because the half is, let's say, about 10% of another. Tomahawks are launched from submarines and from destroyers. What are they going to hit? A submarine to launch them, a destroyer to launch them. Then they have the land-based ones, which they call Typhoon, but they only have 2 land-based systems. The other day, watching a Ukrainian TV program, translated, obviously, a guy there said, "Do you really think that the United States, with one of its weapons, let's say one of the ones it uses the most, and it only has 2 land-based systems, which we could almost call semi-experimental, is going to give them to Ukraine? But even if they do give them, they don't know how to use them. These are technologically very complex systems, and the Americans would have to go and do everything themselves, which would in fact be a declaration of war on all fronts." That is to say, but besides, that wouldn't change the course of the war either. I maintain the following. Listen to what I'm saying. I'm sure they're going to tear me apart for this. But whatever, I don't care. I hope they send them. I really do. Why? Because from my point of view, Putin's excessive strategic caution is leading us into a perverse situation. What is that perverse situation? That by not responding to the so-called red lines that the West has been crossing, giving them everything, Lavrov already issued a warning last November saying, "Be careful with these long-range missiles. This is starting to get serious." He warned us, but nothing. It had no effect. In other words, they've kept escalating. So what's happening? So, the thing is, look, we're no longer talking, and this is important, about Storm Shadow or Scalp-type missiles with a 300-kilometer range, nor about the Taurus, which, as far as anyone knows, have never been delivered. Those have an 800-kilometer range, with the Germans constantly going back and forth, Merkel there dithering. No, we're talking about missiles that have a range of about, the shorter ones, depending on the variant, right? Around 1,500 kilometers or so, and the longer range ones, 2,500 kilometers. So we're no longer talking about going from 300 to 800, which makes this unacceptable. There's also another added problem, as the Russians have already said. Even if they're not used that way, Tomahawks can carry nuclear warheads. How are the Russians supposed to know whether they do or not? They don't know. It can't be known. It's impossible. I mean, this isn't going to happen. I say hopefully, because if they did send this, it would force the Russians once and for all to give a strong response. Why? Because what we're seeing is a very dangerous situation. Shameless on the part of the Westerners, who interpret the Russians' strategic prudence as weakness. And since they see it as weakness, they keep sending things that end up provoking the Russians with fake incidents, like the 3 MiG-31s in Estonia, and one day they're going to lose it and shoot one down. Now that idiot Mark Rutte and the European idiots are already talking about shooting down Russian planes. No, only when they enter European airspace, of course.
Well, by the way, Fernando, this just in, speaking of incidents, an incident involving Pete Hegseth's plane, just an hour ago. According to The Independent, the British press, Pete Hegseth's plane was forced to make an emergency landing in the United Kingdom after a crack appeared in the windshield. Everyone on board was safe after the unscheduled landing. You can see the plane's route there. It was headed to the United States but returned to the UK for an unscheduled stop. They're going to hammer on this, along with Ursula von der Leyen's landing in Bulgaria. Now, Fernando, regarding the Tomahawks, I have an alternative interpretation of that.
Para mí, Trump sí va a convalidar la entrega de...
For me, Trump is indeed going to approve the delivery of a few Tomahawks. About the Tomahawks specifically, they are, in fact, missiles launched from submarines and warships, destroyers. But starting in 2018, Trump announced the withdrawal from the INF Treaty, the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. The treaty itself stipulates that 1 year after the announcement, the countries effectively leave the agreement. Therefore, since 2019, the United States has withdrawn, and it did so for one main reason, above all others, because they wanted to develop a land-launched version of the Tomahawk. And from that point on, they created 2 launchers for this purpose.
Entonces, dos lanzaderas para esto. Una llamada Typhoon en inglés o Tifón en español.
A so-called Typhoon in English, or Typhon in Spanish, with which they can launch both Tomahawks and missiles, these SAM-6 Block 5s. Well, the missiles from the Aegis defense system, supposedly defensive missiles, but easily convertible to offensive ones. So, on one hand, they create this system with launchers for 4 missiles, 4 Tomahawk missiles, terrifying launchers. The first tests of this were carried out in 2025 and were successful, but later, the Marines began a less ambitious program and developed a launcher for a single Tomahawk, a single missile, called, if I remember correctly, the LRF system. They abandoned this program a few years ago because, according to the Marines, these launchers lacked what do they need these missiles for? To deploy them near the coast, as protection for ships or for occupied territory.
A las naves o a un territorio tomado. Carecían de la capacidad de...
Well, they lacked the ability to move within difficult terrains, as intended. But in Ukraine, with these small launchers, they could carry out launches without being as exposed as with the other launchers, the much larger Typhoons, which hold 4 missiles. They produced very few of these, and abandoned the program. This little device, for example. This is one example. And they left these things lying around. Just a few, according to the sources consulted. There's very little information, but apparently fewer than 20 were made. Honestly, Fernando, I suspect they're going to hand off these little gadgets like, well, do you want these that are already out of use? Here are a few, limited ones. But it's just another provocation, another escalation. And then, of course, it'll be presented as, oh, this is a NATO purchase, not from the United States. Yes.
Look, I think we still have the same problem. Even if they're launched one by one, from little more than a jeep, they still have to be launched by the Americans. In other words, the system is very complex.
100%. 100%.
The Russians don't care whether they're the big ones or the small ones. I mean, what this is going to do, if they go through with it, is radicalize the Russians, which I would actually love, because it's the only way to stop an escalation that's going to get out of hand. It's going to get out of hand.
Now 10 of those attacks, right? Possibly 7 intercepted, 3 hitting some target. Do you think Putin would react if he's winning the war anyway?
He has to react somehow. What we don't know is how, but he has to react, because public opinion will turn against him. And above all, let's not forget those who keep him in power, his own allies, that is the Kremlin and Russian establishment, will turn against him. Ultimately, he has to respond in some way, because he has already said it time and again. This would damage relations with the United States and would provoke a strong response. Because let's not forget that, even though we already know they're not going to do it and all that, they can carry nuclear weapons. They can carry nuclear weapons. Yes, of course they can. And the nuclear doctrine that Putin himself changed says that in the face of such risks, there must be a response. Obviously, they're not going to respond with nuclear weapons. But Putin also just said, and didn't tell us more, that apart from the SNIC stuff and all that, which they're finishing developing and everything's going very well, there are new weapons, he didn't say which ones, that are practically ready to go.
habrá que saber cuáles son esas nuevas armas.
We'll have to find out what those new weapons are. The situation is comparable to a balloon, and someone inflating it until at some point the balloon bursts. That's the game of escalating provocations by the West, by NATO, against Russia. For now, the balloon is still holding up, enduring. I have the feeling, Fernando, that this will lead to a greater expansion of the balloon, without it bursting, but with a cushion, a margin that's getting smaller and smaller, to avoid an unprecedented confrontation with unpredictable consequences.
We're heading into a war with Russia. That's absolutely clear to me. Because if they keep doing this, well, indeed, there will come a point, whether it's with tomahawks or whatever, it doesn't matter, when it becomes unacceptable for the Russians. And as I said about the tomahawks, let's not forget one thing. If they carry conventional warheads, the tomahawks aren't going to change the course of the war. The Russians are still winning.
At zero, absolutely nothing.
At zero, meaning, as always, Trump has told us a bunch of lies, saying that the situation is at a standstill. It's not at a standstill. They keep pounding the Ukrainians. That is, what's happening is that in a positional war, you don't measure it by how much territory the Russians conquer each month, but, just to give an example, by how much destruction is inflicted on the enemy, on its troops, its army, its logistical apparatus, and so on. Because the point isn't to conquer a large amount of territory, but to destroy the enemy's army. And in this regard, the Ukrainian army is currently in a dire situation. The Ukrainians themselves say so, you know? I mean, it's not something the Russians are saying.
At the end, two last-minute things, Fernando. But well, the contrast of perspectives is interesting, Fernando, because this is something very grey. No one can determine it with certainty. Whether this is one more step in the escalation without a reaction, whether Trump deliberates and rectifies and therefore does not validate this madness, or whether they take the final step and a direct war begins. No one can determine that, not even the actors themselves. And the decision ultimately depends on very fine details, right? But very fine, playing with fire. That's the context. That's the problem.
Just a second, Fernando.
Well, go ahead.
No, even if Trump signed tomorrow, well, no, then we'd send the tomahawks. It's one thing to sign that he's sending them, and another for the others to actually receive them there and have them operational. It would take quite a long time. I mean, it's not, I send them and next week they're ready. No, months. They probably wouldn't be operational, at least not until well into next year, in the best case scenario.
And the question is, Ukraine holding out until then, especially through the winter, right? Well, here's some breaking news. A meeting between the beheader al-Gulani, recently interviewed by American television, a very interesting interview, and Putin. No comments. For the delegations, a bit more. This also just in, Fernando. Bombers. This happened less than an hour ago. 3 powerful US bombers were seen flying very close to Venezuela. 3 aircraft with the call signs Bani 01, Bani 02, and Bani 03 were observed on extended flight routes from Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, in a striking show of force directed against Venezuelan leader Nicolás Díaz. Maduro, for example. Here's another post picking this up just half an hour ago. This, Infoember. No, sorry, Infobuy, but well, known as Infoember. 2 US B-52 bombers fly over the Caribbean, off the coast of Venezuela. This is the map of those bombers, supposedly for tests, but this is part of Trump's show of force and his geopolitical game, somehow confirmed, or confirmed yet again, in the talk with Milley. That whole, either with us, yes, with us, there's money. If not, the bombers are sent. First, no money sent, then the bombers sent.
Well, look, the United States, okay, talking about both things. First, let's take it step by step. What we've seen, the head cutter meeting with Putin, this is called in political geometry, and even if it's repugnant, and it is to me, it's what always happens. That is, in the end, and it's also part of the doctrine of both the Russians and the Chinese, non-interference in the internal affairs of other countries. You deal with whoever happens to be the leader in that country. In other words, whether you like it or not, whether it's a cruel, savage, and bloodthirsty dictator or a Nobel Peace Prize winner, not like Karina's case. I mean, what's there? The Taliban. What's there? I mean, they're barbarians, yes, but the ones governing Afghanistan right now are the Taliban. Well, this is, let's say, the basis of international relations. You deal with whoever's there. Of course, if you're the United States, you can play at regime change, but we've already seen that changing regimes by force doesn't usually go very well, especially when wars get involved. But that's the way it is.
On the other hand, Fernando, the rapprochement was initiated by Al-Golani with the request to maintain the Russian bases. And Al-Golani is a figure who, although he has always been a CIA agent and served their interests, is quite unpredictable, like any member of the Islamic State. So at any moment, Al-Golani could shift from being pro-Israel to anti-Israel and lean, in some way, toward Russia. Russia is not going to miss an opportunity like that in the region, out of love for the people. No.
No, not out of love for Bashar al-Assad, no. I mean, no, look, indeed, he deals with Al-Golani and says to him, hey, can you guarantee the 2 bases I have? Yes. And besides, we'll reach some kind of agreement that benefits us regarding that matter. Well, they're going to do it. Clearly, yes. Let's not forget, moreover, that even though the Iranians are over there doing whatever they want in Syria, Putin doesn't have a bad relationship with Israel. That's just how it is. Not at all, they don't get along badly. They might make some statement, as almost everyone has, saying that what's happening to the Palestinians is terrible and that it has to stop, and that, in line with the UN Charter, international law, and the agreements adopted by the United Nations, there must be 2 states. Well, that's just repeating what everyone already knows. But they also know that neither the Israelis nor the Americans are going to do it. So, well, this is political pragmatism in a no-holds-barred struggle between the collective West, led by the American empire, and on the other hand, countries like Russia or China, which are confronting that empire and can't afford to miss opportunities. In this case, maintaining a presence in Syria suits them very well from a military and geostrategic standpoint, because it gives them the ability to project power and intervene throughout the region. So, well, they're not going to waste the opportunity. And even though, I don't know, I have no idea what Putin thinks, let's suppose that even if Putin finds that headcutter guy disgusting, he's been fighting against him. Let's not forget that the Russians have been fighting against those people. Well, that's geopolitics for you. Now, if necessary, we become allies. That's the most normal thing in the world, even if it's immoral. But, well, that's just how things work. I always say that geopolitics, international relations, are the most immoral and disgusting things in the world. Well, this is proof of that, but that's how it is. And what any leader would do, let's say, who tries to project their country's influence in a region as important as the Middle East. Everyone's doing it, I mean. Not to mention the Americans, but the Chinese are doing it, the Russians are doing it, the Indians are doing it. Everyone's doing it. Well, that's how it is. This is the reality, the harsh reality we have to face, not what Hollywood movies tell us about good guys and bad guys and everything turning out fine in the end. No, it doesn't. The bad guys eventually reinvent themselves, and if it suits you, you side with the bad guys, period. That's how it is. Political pragmatism, let's say. And then the second issue, the thing is, I lost my train of thought.
Perdona, lo de... que se me ha ido la cabeza. Lo de...
Sí, no, los bombarderos...
Yes, no, the bombers. The bombers that have been deployed, flying over Venezuelan skies, very close to Venezuela's airspace. More pressure from Trump in the same direction.
Más presión de Trump en el mismo sentido.
Claro, más músculo. Por una parte, más músculo, es decir, más...
Of course, more muscle. On the one hand, more muscle, meaning showing more strength toward Venezuela, further creating that sense of the inevitability of war. Obviously, there will come a time when if war breaks out, the blame will be placed on the Venezuelans. This is obvious. The coincidental, real, or fabricated case they'll build to say, no, it's that the Venezuelans attacked us. Well, that's it. The serious problem Venezuela has, which it will continue to have even if Trump disappears, and with future presidents, is an energy problem. And that's because the United States, let's not forget, although thanks to hydraulic fracturing, it has been able to greatly increase in the short term, and this must be emphasized, in the short term, its gas and oil production. While in the case of gas, it has not only been able to meet its domestic demand, but has also become an exporting country. In the case of oil, it has not.
En el caso del petróleo, no. Y Estados Unidos sigue importando petróleo. Es verdad que no importa tanto como...
And the United States keeps importing oil. It's true that it doesn't import as much as it did years ago, that hydraulic fracturing has made it import less, but it still imports oil. And hydraulic fracturing is bread for today and hunger for tomorrow, because apart from having very high costs, which will only keep increasing, there are a number of deposits that are overexploited, already identified in the United States. Not much more can be found, and these deposits are depleted very quickly. So in the next decade, the boom of hydraulic fracturing, shale gas, and shale oil will come to an end. And then what's left?
Se va a acabar. Y entonces, ¿qué queda? Venezuela.
Venezuela has different types of oil, but real oil. Let me explain. This thing called shale gas or shale oil and so on, many experts consider that it's not really oil. That is, they're products like the tar sands in Canada, which do contain components from which similar to oil or gas can be extracted, but they're actually of very poor quality. Well, yes, it can be used, but it wouldn't be oil in the proper sense. Venezuela, on the other hand, does have real oil, and let's not forget that it holds the largest reserves in the world. And the Chinese are involved in Venezuela, exploiting that oil. As we've seen, the United States is going to go after Venezuela, no matter what. But it's no longer a question of whether Maduro is in power. It doesn't matter if it's Maduro, if Corina Machado comes tomorrow, or if the Martians show up. What I mean is they have to go after Venezuela because it's the largest oil supplier on its continent, in the region. And they have no other choice. They can also do it, and they will, with Mexico, which also has oil, but Venezuela is key for them, especially in that context where, if as everything suggests, they lose their ability to intervene forcefully in Eurasia, even in Africa, they'll have to stick, let's put it that way, to the Monroe Doctrine. America for the Americans, meaning the North Americans, the Americans from the North. They'll have to hold on to the American continent, or at least try to, and Venezuela is key. So the question is how they'll do it. Maybe, if the one who comes after Trump takes over, he'll do it one way or another, stage a coup, find, 1,000 ways. But it's clear, and it's an energy issue, and they know it. And look, Venezuela has tried to negotiate with the United States and all that, and American companies are still operating there.
Yes, they recently reactivated Chevron's operations over there. Fernando, my friend, let's wrap things up here after 2 hours of conversation. As always, a pleasure. On Friday the 12th, back on DMP Geopolitics with your show, and again on Demolishing Myths on Sunday. Sunday.
All right, there will be plenty to talk about.
Yes, by the way, the usual reminders. Please help us out with a thumbs up, the share button, and subscriptions. Well, for those who want to, the notification bell to get the latest updates from our posts. You can also support us through memberships and via PayPal on our social media. Join us on DMP Geopolitics and on our English channel, below the link to Motion Political Nets, with Fernando speaking phenomenal English.
You can't miss it. Just to see that. Let's see.
Saying me, demolishers, big hugs, and see you tomorrow. Fernando, bye-bye. See you later.
¿Qué?